My story, to me, is really about telling a Greek tragedy that turned into a Disney movie with a happy ending. You know, at age 18, I found out that I was pregnant. And by 19, I gave birth to Jennifer. But the story is not an easy story in the beginning. And what happened was where there was a lot of people involved. You see, I did want to get married. We wanted to run off and get married and have a baby, but the family stepped in. My parents did not want me to have anything to do with the father. And that very next day, after we tried to run off and actually went over to his mother's house, that next day when I came home, my mother was, I understand now, was trying to save me from making a mistake in her mind. But what happened is the father and I wanted to run off and get married. We went to his parents' house. But that next day, after my parents had called them, we came home. And that whole day, my mother worked on me, pointing out what a bad person he was. And I don't even remember all the details. I just know that my life was going to change. I was pregnant, and they weren't happy. And back in those days, girls didn't get pregnant. Back in those days, when you got pregnant, I shamed my father, I shamed my mother, and so they had to figure out, what are they going to do? The decision was made that they would ship me off to another neighborhood. They knew of a woman who had been pregnant also out of wedlock, and that's where I would go. That's the choice that we would make, that I would give birth and they would ship me off, and I had become the family secret for years. It wasn't that far away from where we lived, and there were only 2 girlfriends that even knew. And so there I was in my months of pregnancy, this young girl with, I can still see me with the pigtails in the hair, and getting bigger day by day. I was perky and energized, and it was really fascinating to feel the feet on my stomach and knowing that there was something really wonderful inside of me. So that day came, the labor, and there was only one person that was with me, and that was Virginia. She brought a coloring book and crayons, and as I was in labor and in pain, I remember. In fact, I remember the pain of giving birth. Of course, back then, they also did the kind of injection block that you do, and that happened. I went into surgery, and of course I don't remember any of that, but I do remember waking up the next day and it was all over. And I have to say that in order to protect myself, there's so much that I don't remember. It was as if I blacked everything out. It was if I wanted to make it not even happen for me. We had lied to the patient who was next to me. But I remember when the nurse came in. And back then, I think you have to remember too that being an unwed mother, it was very common for families to ship their children off. You either were shipped out of the area, you went to some church, but it wasn't something that you talked about. I have to think that today is better. I think about all of the support organizations that are out there for young girls that they can go to, where open adoption is real and it exists. Because you see, at 6 months, I had to sign all the paperwork. I will never forget that day, like I will never forget the birth of my daughter, Jennifer. She is my blood. She is my daughter. So when I say Disneyland and a happy ending, it's true. The adoption allowed that opportunity to happen to me. The amount of prayers, the amount of time spent of guilt, of shame, of fear, of wondering, where is she? Is she healthy? Is she alive? Is she a drug addict? That was a concern, because you see, a part of my story is that I too went in some really dark places. Here I was as a 19-year-old girl giving birth, but by the time I was 23, I was an alcoholic drug addict, sobbing and crying about where might Jennifer be, and I didn't know her name. That was the only thing I remembered that day, that I had to go back and sign that paperwork. I remembered only 2 things about her history, no, 3. Jennifer, that the father was an engineer, and that they were in this city in Orange County, California. I signed that paperwork, and back then when you signed that paperwork, you gave away all of your rights. I was never ever from that day forward given the right to find her. One day I had sent a letter to the Social Security asking about her. They did reply back. She was alive. She was fine. And that was it. That was all the information I had. But I was grateful for that. She was alive, at least. That day when I signed that paperwork, all I did was sob and cry and sob and cry. And that was the decision that I made. That was the choice I made. But she was alive. And that maybe is important to hear too. She was alive. And that gave me some hope. It was years later that I really confessed to the father that a child was born. I denied him the right to know about her, and I've had to live with that decision and that consequence as well, even though we have certainly talked and we reconnected, and he knows about her and he's had all the opportunity to build a relationship with her. But you will hear the story of how we did connect. You know, it's a secret that I had to live with for many, many years, and the family, my parents, no one in the family knew until that one day when my life changed again. But in that sort of Disney movie story that has been ongoing with all kinds of fun episodes. So there is a happy ending to this story that is enduring and ongoing. And it is something to say about prayer and hope. I am eternally grateful that I have Jennifer in my life today. I am grateful that we have developed a relationship as uniquely ours. I am her birth mother. I am not her mother. By giving her away, I was keenly aware of what that could possibly do to her. And that's why I always wanted to be there, to reach out, to find her. And so I knew that there could be some other consequences. And through the years, while our relationship has grown and developed into what we have, there was also some harsh truths and realities that I had to deal with emotionally, and she too. And luckily, we've been able to talk about the dynamic of what happens between people who are given away for adoption. What happens to birth mothers and their emotions and their feelings. And where can there be healing that can happen between the two. And that, I want to believe, is evolving and happening for us too. So I have nothing but gratitude about that. But it does bring up feelings, of course, that I created some reactions between the birth father, family, how extended does a family need to be, and Jennifer's choices all along the way, because it is, and I realized her choice. I think in the very, very beginning, the relationship that we had then was more tepid, more nuanced, more, it had to be safe for her. And I wanted to do everything that I could do to let her know that there was no pressure. I had no expectations of how she might react to me. But as you will hear, it was made easy. Maybe through the grace of God, it was made easy. Some of you are going to say, not maybe, yes. So yes, I am grateful as a birth mother to say that I've been blessed with healing, that to give your child up for adoption, to give them away with a finality that I had faced then. I want to say and repeat on some level that the support that we have today for adopting a child out, and I certainly did not know the adoptive parents. I had the opportunity to meet them, but the reason I gave Jennifer away, and that's maybe an important part of the story too, and certainly I had to share that with Jennifer, that I did not want her being raised with a father that my mother hated. I understood enough at that age that to bring a child into life, to have some kind of support and love and nurturing is what I believed that I could give her. And as much as it hurt to make that choice, I felt it was the best one then. And now that I know full circle the kind of life that she did have, the kind of loving parents that she did have, it was the right choice to make. Because I knew, if you go back in my history of being an alcoholic and a drug addict, and the stories, a whole nother story, another time, that to know that she wouldn't have been brought up in that. And that gives me some solace to know that it was the right choice to make.
I can't remember how old I was when my parents told me that I was adopted. I always felt a little bit different. I sometimes felt that I didn't fit in, and my personality was very different than my parents and even my brother. But they did tell me at some point, and I do remember feeling special. They told me I was special. I do remember feeling different. I do remember telling some friends, almost bragging about it, because it was so unique, and I didn't have another friend or know anybody else who had also been adopted. Back then it was fine. I had a great family. I had great parents. I had a brother. We lived by the beach in Southern California. A great childhood, a stable childhood. But years later, my inquisitive mind found me going through my dad's files in his office. I don't remember if I set out to find anything related to my adoption or not, but I did know that there was something that was secret that I wanted to know. And so I went through his files, and I found an attorney's folder. And I remembered my parents telling me that it was a private adoption and that they went through an attorney. I went through the files. I saw names, I saw dates, I saw my parents' signatures. But then I got to a page, and at the bottom of that page, there was a signature of a name that I did not recognize. Underneath it, it said the words, birth mother. I looked at the name again, and there it was, Janet Margot Jansen. She was my birth mother. I didn't know what to do with this information, but I immediately felt guilty. I felt guilty because I was going through my father's files, and I felt like if I told my parents that I did that and then I found her name, that it would hurt their feelings. And so I kept it to myself. I was probably 10, maybe 11 or 12. As the years went on, I thought about her from time to time. I thought about how different I was from my family. But I didn't really do anything. I was caught up in junior high, I was caught up in high school, caught up in just living the American dream with my family. It would be a few years later, when I was pregnant with my first child, that a switch turned on, and I knew I had to find out more information about my birth family and about my heritage. What made me so different? Why did I laugh so loud and my parents were so quiet? Why did I have to know everything? Why was I so emotional? Why did I do the things that I do? These questions bothered me. And when I was in the hospital giving birth to my firstborn son, my mother told me that it was the same hospital that I was born in. That coincidence just set me on a path. And fast forward 3 years from there and another child, I had decided to get serious about looking for Janet. I didn't tell my parents because it took me back to that day in Dad's office. And I felt so guilty. I didn't want to hurt my mom and Dad. But I had this burning desire to find out who I was. I contacted a private investigator. To be honest, I don't remember how I found her name. But I talked to her on the phone, told her my story, and she invited me to do some volunteering for her. And that in return for helping her, she would help me find Janet. Again, I didn't tell a soul. One day I was with her in the bottom level of a courthouse where there are public records. I was at the bottom of the courthouse. We were going through public records. I had no idea that marriage and death certificates were available for anyone to see. And as I was going through them, she told me, hey, go ahead and look for Janet. And so I went to the J's and I went through the files. And it was about an hour later. And in that hour, I'm thinking there's no possible way I'm going to find her. But my eyes fell on a signature in one of the files that I was looking at. And there it was, Janet Margot Jansen. I thought this has got to be a coincidence. This cannot be the same Janet on that sheet. And it was an address that was given. The address was in a city not too far away from where we were. And so the day ended, and I was excited, but I was scared. I took that information home with me, and I thought about it for a couple of days. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. But about 3 days later, because I happened to be very impatient and I couldn't wait any longer, so 3 days after finding that in that courthouse, I loaded my 2 boys up. They were 3 and 1 at the time. And I drove to this city that from our house at the time was probably an hour away. I had no plan. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew that there was a connection to this city and I needed to just drive. And so I drove. When I entered the city, there was a stoplight. I stopped. I looked down at my files because I thought, well, I'm here. I wonder what this says. I wonder if there is a local library nearby. Maybe I can find a library and look up high school pictures, and maybe I could find Janet. But when I looked at the address next to me on that paper, I looked back up again before the light turned green, and I noticed that the street sign was the exact same name as the paperwork that I had. I didn't know if I should turn right or turn left. I wasn't even sure if this was the right street, but the name was the same. I took my chances and turned left. I knew enough to know that I probably don't need to drive too far before I look at the address, and so I pulled over about 300 feet away. I pulled over, I stopped, I looked down at the actual physical address, at the number. When I looked up, the house across the street from me was the same exact number. I couldn't believe it. It was like I was living a miracle at the time. I knew that maybe God was on my side and that something was about to happen. I didn't think too much about it because I was a little bit in shock. I remember telling my oldest son, KJ, sit still, Mom, you'll be right back. And before I knew it, really without giving too much thought, I was walking along the walkway and moving towards a front door. I knocked on the front door. I didn't know what I was going to say. It's not something that I would have typically done. It was very outside of my character. But I knocked on the door and a man answered the door. And when I saw this older man and I saw his white, blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, I thought of my second-born son, Joshua. And I thought, my gosh, he looks just like Josh does. And I stumbled some words out. Again, I hadn't rehearsed this. I didn't know this was going to happen. I said the words, I have every reason to believe that I might be your granddaughter. He looked at me for a minute. He didn't say anything, but he reached out his arms. He motioned for me to come to him. He opened the screen door and drew me into a hug that just felt like home. It was very difficult to explain, very difficult to describe. But I felt like I belonged in that embrace at that time. He then said, please come on in. There is someone that has been wanting to meet you. And I went into a back bedroom where his wife, my grandmother, my Oma in German, that's our heritage, was in a bed. She had just had, I believe, hip replacement surgery. And the moment she saw me, she started sobbing. I went over to her, gave her a hug, she gave me a hug, and after that it was like a whirlwind. It was probably 15 minutes later, and this man, my grandfather, Opa, as we call him, had contacted Janet on the phone, and within minutes I was on the phone with my birth mother, talking to her, hearing her voice for the very first time. Now, somewhere in between that time, I did go out to the car and get my boys. I don't know how much time lapsed. But I knew I was living a miracle. I knew that God had answered my prayer. In fact, just a few short days before I found her in that courthouse, I had surrendered everything to God. What I didn't say is how long it took me to search for her and the enormous emotional effort that it took to continue searching for her while keeping it a secret the whole time. And so there I was talking to her on the phone. I don't remember when I left, but I obviously left. I went home. I did tell my husband at the time. And Janet had contacted my birth father, which I never in a million years thought I would be talking to him. I knew that the odds of me even talking to my birth mother weren't real great. But there I was. He called me that night, and I was talking to him. And everything sounds perfect, but this is where my story truly develops. It was a miracle that we found each other, but there was no one to tell me what to feel, how to feel, what would happen next, what to expect, what was my role, how do I handle this, what do I say to her, what do I say to him, what do I tell my parents. I did talk to my parents the next day, and I did tell them. And their response was, neutral. I wasn't really sure what to think, but they supported me. Pretty soon we had made arrangements, and I met Janet for the first time, and I met my birth father for the first time. And it was like I had always belonged. Janet made a real conscious effort to let me know how special I was. That message was the opposite of how I felt sometimes. Because when you're adopted and you don't know all the details, you wonder, was I not good enough? Was I wanted? Years later, I would actually work for a pregnancy crisis center. And so I identified with a lot of people and a lot of stories. And I learned at that center that I wasn't given away. I was placed for adoption with a very special family. But there were dynamics that needed to be navigated. And I still carried around guilt and shame because I didn't know how I was supposed to love my birth mother and love my family. And was that fair? And whose feelings am I hurting? But over the years, as we got to know each other, over the years, as my parents grew to appreciate the freedom that I had that I never had before because I had found answers. Things clicked for me. I had developed an eating disorder in high school, and when I was older, I would recognize the fact that I knew I was adopted and that I was fighting feelings of shame and not feeling good enough. And so finding Janet was so healing for me. Finding my birth father was so healing for me. Janet was able to tell me that I was wanted and that she made the choice that was probably best. She shared with me her past of alcohol, substance abuse. And the healing began. It didn't happen overnight. What we have been able to do since then is grow a real relationship and find ourselves and find our place in each other's lives. And the shame is gone. The healing is probably ongoing. But it filled this hole inside of me so completely that I was able to get over some of the obstacles like the eating disorder, thought processes and behaviors. And I felt whole for the very first time. Finding Janet and finding my birth father, finding my family, and hearing that I was loved, and knowing as an adult by working at the Pregnancy Crisis Center, knowing that she could have chosen abortion. It wasn't legal the year I was born. It would be 2 years later, made legal. But they existed. And if someone wanted one and they looked a little hard enough for one, they would find an opportunity. And so just the realization that I'm here and that maybe it would have turned out very, very differently. The realization that I could have been placed with anybody, and God placed me with a family, with 2 parents that gave me security, that gave me love, that gave me opportunity, that gave me life in another sense, has stayed with me through the years. And I realize what a special story this is.
So I just want to say, aren't you happy that I made the decision that I made?
Honestly, knowing who you are and where you came from and your struggles, to be honest, yes. As much as I love you, I absolutely 1000% appreciate the decision that you made.
This is funny. This is kind of like the first time, too, that we've ever had this kind of connection, because we wouldn't have had it. You wouldn't be here. I'd be talking to this blank wall.
Mm-hmm.
And here you are.
And I think that you wanted this conversation to take place sooner, but we have evolved. Our relationship has changed and evolved so much through the years that
Yes.
it's like you're my soulmate. And I know that that sounds really dorky, but you're so much like me. I'm so much like you. And that I don't know. I didn't want to be wandering my whole life looking for a ghost. You know, I didn't know if you'd be alive when I started searching for you. And if you remember, it took me 4 years to find you. Now, in that time, we've learned now that we could have done that a lot quicker and a lot easier. But when I found you and really saw the excitement in your face, and I knew I really was wanted. I mean, you really did want me, right?
Yeah, I did. Right. No question about it. I mean,
and if things would have been different, you know, would you have kept me? If your situation, and I think every adoptee would probably want to know this, just to kind of solidify that they were wanted, because I think the point, I guess, that I was going to make is that there are a lot of mothers who either choose an abortion or they choose to parent their child and they're not equipped. They're not able to, they don't have the support system. And I know that you didn't have a support system either. But it was good. I asked you the question, but you told me years ago the answer, that you would have loved to have me. You would have loved to have been in a situation where you could have me and that you could have parented me. And I needed to hear that.
yes.
And now I've heard it multiple times, which is good, because sometimes I'm slow and it takes it takes a few times for me, you know, for me to get it. But yeah, I didn't know if you would even want to see me. There are adoptees that find their birth parents, and it ends right there. And I think our story is so unique because we're in each other's lives, you know. And I know that after you placed me for adoption, you went through some dark times, and my heart goes out to you. You never went on to have any children other than me, and so you didn't get to parent a child. You made a sacrifice, but you chose the way of life. Yet even still, you went through some dark times. And what year was it when you became sober?
I sobered up in 1986, January 23rd.
Okay. And do you remember, that's the year I graduated high school.
Oh.
And so I was 18, and shortly after that is when I would really have this burning desire to find you. And I think it's pretty cool that the year I graduated, became an adult, so to speak, that's the year that you were clean and sober, because I just don't know how our reunion would have been if you hadn't been. And so that's a gift also.
If I was still out there, I can tell you it would not be this Disney movie I've been telling you about.
Yeah.
I mean, truly, one of the greatest things that happened to me when I first was clean and sober, and there was an older man. I had gone to this gathering of people in sobriety, and he, I don't know, he had said that he had given a child away for adoption, and we had this conversation. And I remember so vividly at this party, he said to me, Janet, if you stay clean and sober and you work the steps and do what you need to do, one day you will find your daughter. And he said that to me, and it was just like,
Wow.
it was less than 3 years of sobriety.
Wow.
And so, and another thing I want to share that, you know, this story about happy endings after you connect is not always possible unless you're willing to be brave and bold and strong and love. Mm-hmm. And love is a key word. But there was a time in our connecting, and I would visit and we would connect, and then I felt like there was a distance. You needed time to process what was going on. And I had a woman friend who was very close in AA, and she said to me, Janet, what you get to do, the only thing you get to do is to love her. Mm-hmm. And I have found that love, and that's what I've always wanted to give you.
Yeah, and I feel that, and I'm grateful for that, and I really appreciate the fact that you never pushed, you never pressed, you were there for me. And you know, I'll be honest, I needed that those first few years. It's like you told me I was wanted. But if I'm going to be really, really honest, I think it took some time for me to really own that belief. And I needed to see you come after me. I needed to see you pursue me, in a sense, because I needed so badly to know that I was wanted. You know, it's just, that's been amazing. And I think too, when I hear you say, when you gave me up and you gave me away, there is such a better way to say that, and that's why I say placed.
Yeah, I heard you when you said that.
Yeah, and because we don't, you know, it's not, it doesn't have to be such a shameful, negative thing. You made the best choice for me. You took an active role in securing my future. You placed me, not physically, but you placed me in the arms of very well-equipped parents who were absolutely amazing. And then when you found me and I found you, when we found each other, you accepted that too. We didn't know what role, right? I mean,
Right.
I was very cautious to not call you mom, obviously. I mean, my mom is my mom.
Yes.
And there was a little bit of identity crisis for me at the time because I didn't know, well, do I, you know, think of them as family? And then what about my parents? What about my family? And how do I navigate this? And the beauty of that is that we've had years together to navigate it, and now look where we're at. I mean, now we're taking spin classes at my gym, and we're grunting together, and we're finishing together. And that's, you know, I love that illustration. Because, you know, in spin, I know this is kind of goofy, but you know how we do that one track, and it's called hills?
Yes.
And you go up and you go down. I think about that. I think about my journey and how there are, you know, hills that we have to climb, and that there are some easy, smooth parts of it also. And I just want to tell you, thank you for hanging in there with me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for placing me into the arms of a mother and father. And I don't know, thank you.
That's great. You want a hug?
I do want a hug. Oh, your hugs feel good.
This is great. Thank you.
And you know, the other day when we were trying on clothes, and I went in your room, in my house,
In her house.
and I went and I saw your suitcase open, and I wanted to try on the red shoes.
Red shoes.
And as I was putting the one shoe on and looking at myself in the mirror, I did have just a flash of what maybe it would have been like as a little girl. And it was really cool that I did something that maybe, you know, that not maybe, we've never gotten to do together. And I tried on your shoes, and I just thought, how neat. It's just a simple thing, but how neat that we get to do it now when there's still time.
This is a testimony to what adoption can do. I mean, when you think about it, the reality of this, I mean, it may not be that way for everyone.
Right.
We've earned our relationship together.
It's taken work and
it has-
communication.
Yes.
And I don't know about you, I'm so grateful for my family for being there through it all. You know, they had to navigate a lot of stuff too.
Yes.
We didn't talk about stuff like that, you know, back then, like we can talk about now. And so now, the idea of open adoption,
Yes.
you know, had I known that I was loved at 13, 14, 15, maybe I wouldn't have developed an eating disorder. I don't know.
Right.
And so I think it's great what we have today. But I have, I've never looked at you as someone who did anything wrong. In fact, I look at you as a hero because you could have chosen a different path, a very different path. And you chose life.
That's it.
You know, I hope we have another 25 years together.
Right. And I think, as a mother, you as a mother, I've always delineated the idea that because I didn't raise you, I certainly have not earned that right to be called a mother. But what I do know, I call you daughter because you were inside of me. I felt you. I cared for you. I remember when the water broke. I remember, going to the hospital. And those moments have what I believe has earned me the right to know that you are my blood, that you are my daughter. And I've earned that right. But I get it. I am your birth mother, and I have a great deal of respect for your mother, and have been able to compartmentalize that, I think, in a healthy way.
Sure.
And in today's time, with the open adoptions and the freedom of information, I didn't have that then, and I signed that away. So my suffering was my suffering.
Right.
But our opportunity to have this kind of relationship and for it to grow and to evolve.
Yes.
This has been one of the better trips that we've had. Each time it just gets better.
It does get better, but you know what? You just made me think of something. And, because I worked in a pregnancy, life-affirming ministry for so long, that we become a parent the moment of conception. And so maybe you couldn't carry me around in an infant carrier. Maybe you couldn't carry me or take me to the park and do things. And maybe we couldn't have been, two separate entities but together. But you cared for me in the womb. You made the best parenting decision that you could with the resources that you had. And so you are a mother. And I think that it would be amazing and maybe healing for a lot of birth moms or pregnant women that are contemplating adoption, that if they really understood, I'm making a parenting decision for this child. I'm making a decision for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And so, yeah, you have earned that right. Now, our relationship is, I feel like you're quickly becoming my best friend. I've looked at you as a sister before, but as we age and as we grow closer, you are a dear, dear friend, and I never expected that. This happy ending may not be for everyone, but what I'm hoping people can get from this is, I hope they see the healing that took place. I hope they can just see how we've both come full circle.
Right.
You knew that I forgave you. I remember you asking me that. I know that you loved me. And even if that's all we had, let's just say we didn't have the last 25 years, that still healed my heart. This is just icing on the cake.
Yeah.
A really big, awesome cake. So I think it's great. I think it's awesome.
Sugar-free, but
yeah, don't we wish?
Yeah.
No carbs. Yeah. I'm looking forward to, more.
Yes.
I wish we didn't live so far apart.
And we have adventures in mind. We're
We do.
dreaming about going places and doing things.
Right.
So,
It's a gift.
God willing, we still have more adventure and journey.
Sure, we do. Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. One more hug?
Yes.
I do love you.
I love you.
Thank you. One more hug?
Yes.
I do love you.
I love you.